Hello everybody, my name is Aquilla Fleetwood. I'm the great-great-grandson of Charles and Lucinda Fleetwood. Lucinda walked the Trail of Tears back in 1834. Charles Fleetwood was also known as Stagecoach Charlie. And he married Lucinda in 1834. He met her at Fort Gibson when she came off the Trail of Tears. And I want to read a book here that has a lot of histories of the Fleetwood family. And this is by, Jennifer Sparks and Elaine Grant. And I thank them for all this research here. And so the Fleetwoods began coming to America. In 1609, Edward Fleetwood, gentleman, was a member of the Jamestown colony. In 1620, Sir William Fleetwood and Edward Fleetwood, Esquire, were listed as adventurers to America. And in 1652, Francis was granted land in Lower Norfolk County, Virginia. It is to his possible son Henry that we can definitely trace our ancestry. In 1660, after the time of Oliver Cromwell and the Commonwealth, Charles II, son of Charles I, was restored to the throne of England. Colonization in America continued, and the lower part of Virginia was renamed Carolina in honor of Charles II. Some Fleetwoods may have sailed to the Carolinas during this time as a result of the family's role during the time of the Commonwealth. In 1769, Henry's son, William Fleetwood Sr. of Bertie County, North Carolina, made his last will and testament. He divided his extensive land holdings between his sons. Each parcel decreased in size and value with the age of the recipient. To his youngest son, Hardy, he left what is called the plantation manor. Most of the livestock he divided between his daughters and his younger sons. He also left to his daughter a slave named Caesar to be sold or hired out, and the profit to be divided equally. To his son Edmund, he gave the remainder of his land in Bucklesbury, Pocosin, and one cow and a calf. Okay. William's son Edmund married Winifred Nellie Sparkman in December of 1785. He was approximately 40 years old and she was 25. She was a daughter of Jesse Sparkman and Rebecca Reed. Edmund's brother Hardy stood as bondman. By the time Edmund and Winifred were married, the Revolutionary War had ended. The American people were no longer English subjects, but American currency was still in pounds and pence. Edmund and Winifred had 7 children together. Edmund Jr., Martha, Aquilla, from where I get my name, William, Winifred, Sarah, and Charles. Okay, so let's turn past some of this. Okay, so indeed the Fleetwoods were English, and you will see time and again in family testimony that Charles Fleetwood was an Englishman. But in all actuality, it was his father Edmund who was the last English subject. Charles was a first-generation American, a child of the Federalist period. When Edmund Fleetwood died in the fall of 1818, his youngest son Charles was 10 years old. Okay, let's turn just more. I'm not going to try to go through all of this, but I'll pick it out. Okay, during the next 11 years, Charles' older brother Aquilla dies, and his brother Edmund Jr. and William move west. Edmund settles in St. Clair County, Illinois, near St. Louis, and William settles further west in Chariton County, Missouri. It appears Charles travels west with him. In 1828, in St. Louis, Missouri, Charles Fleetwood transferred power of attorney to a lawyer in Bertie County to recover his proceeds due him from his father's estate. In September of 1829, Charles Fleetwood, late of Bertie County and soon to be of Louisiana, sells what land he has remained in North Carolina to one Joseph B.G. Rolock. He deeds his slaves to his sister and his interest in Edge Hill to his mother. Okay. Now, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 marked the beginning of the forced removal of the 5 civilized tribes. Fort Gibson had been a military post since 1824, with a new role as a staging area for military expeditions sent to explore the western region and to seek peace between the Plain Indians and the resettled tribes. The regiment of dragoons began reporting to Fort Gibson in 1833. The Removal Act spurred the Ranger Expedition of 1832 and the Dragoon Expedition of 1834 from Fort Gibson. Although the entire Dragoon Regiment was assigned to the expedition, nearly half of the group remained at the fort due to malaria and other illnesses. In 1833, at the age of 25, Charles Fleetwood enlisted at Jefferson Barracks, St. Louis, Missouri, in the 1st Regiment of Dragoons. The Dragoons were an excellent group of soldiers who were chosen based on certain criteria, which included they must be at least 21 years of age, able to read and write, and they come from a reputable family. Charles was assigned to Company C, 1st Dragoons Regiments. By May of 1834, he was stationed at Fort Gibson, Arkansas Territory. The record shows his troops were at Fort Gibson from December 1833 to about June 1834. Now we're going to switch over to Lucinda Morgan, who was born in 1817 and died in 1888. Lucinda Morgan was born about 1818, probably in the Union County, Georgia to North Carolina, Tennessee border. Her father was old Hosea Morgan, a half-white, half-Catawba Indian. Her mother was Awi Wolf, who was half Cherokee and mixture of probably Catawba and maybe black. Testimony states she was once a slave, but it is quite possible she was an Indian slave and not black. No one knows for sure. Testimony states that she was a member of the Deer Clan. Some reports say Hosea's father was Jeremiah Morgan, a white man, and his mother was Lucy Buffalo, a Catawba woman. Since Hosea was listed over 50 in 1834, his birth would have occurred prior to 1784. Awi's parents appeared to have been Annie Sourjohn and Wolf. Some say Awi was a sister to Tom Starr and Nancy Starr, but that is a tangled concept that is yet to be unraveled because Awi was listed as under 50 in March of 1834 and over 50 in May of 1834. It is apparent her birthday was in April of 1784. Lucinda Morgan's father, Hosea, was described as being very tall, very dark with long, straight black hair. It is said that he did not speak Cherokee, but he understood it. He spoke a different language, was referred to as a Mexican or a Spaniard. However, it is known that the Spanish language was the second language of the Catawba, as French was to the Huron and English was to the Cherokees. Okay, let me turn a couple pages here. I'm not going to go through every bit of this. Under the Treaty of 1819 between the United States and the Cherokee Nation, the Cherokees seceded that area of North Carolina, Georgia, which was originally settled by the Catawbas. Those Cherokees that wished to remain in that area and become citizens of the United States could do so and receive a reservation of 640 acres to include their improvements. However, Georgia soon took the reservations, declaring that no Indian could live within the boundaries of Georgia under any pretext. Families were forced to move on to unseceded areas of the Cherokee Nation. This may have been when Hosea Morgan and his wife, Awi Wolf, moved just across the Georgia state line into western North Carolina and came to live in the Hiwassee River area. Testimony states they applied for citizenship in the Cherokee Nation East and were rejected on account of their being Catawbas, part Catawba. But they were told they could open up fields for cultivation and live among the Cherokees. It is unclear as to when would they have applied to the Cherokees and by what method. Would there have been anything in writing, or would they simply have appeared before a council and gotten a verbal answer? The Morgan family lived in one of the valley towns along the Hiwassee River in North Carolina, and the children went to the Reverend Everett Jones Mission School. After Hosea Morgan agreed to move to the Cherokee Nation West, the government agents inventoried his holdings. In March of 1834, the Morgan family, along with about 450 other immigrant Cherokees, began their trek to the reserve land west of the Mississippi. These individual groups that traveled the water routes and the land routes, one after another, between 1832 and 1836, became known as the immigrant settlers. Lucinda described the beginning of the journey as follows. We enrolled under Major B.F. Curry, United States enrolling officer, and he delivered us to Lieutenant Harris at Calhoun, Tennessee, where we took the water in flat-bottom boats and came to Waterloo, Alabama, where we took steamboats. The steamboats were filthy and crowded. The contractors seldom cleaned the boats between trips, and their crafts became disease carriers. The food was disgusting, mostly cold meat packed inside of barrels. So they come about 40 miles above Little Rock, and what happened was, okay, the small creek that runs into Arkansas River is at 40 miles north of Little Rock. The Arkansas River was exceptionally low in 1834 due to the series of droughts. At the mouth of the Cauldron Creek, Lieutenant Harris and the captain of the Yeatman decided they could proceed no further. The water in the river was only 26 inches deep. The boat required 3.5 feet of water. So they camped on the bluff overlooking the creek, and while they waited, a horrendous thing happened. In 1834, a cholera epidemic that had raged in Europe the year before began to sweep the United States. Beginning in the north, it rapidly worked its way south, down the rivers from the Great Lakes and the Northeast. By April of 1834, cases were beginning to be reported in Arkansas. Probably several days earlier at Little Rock, the group had become infected with cholera through contact with other whites. The disease broke out among the Indians while they were at camp, and the effect was devastating. After only 3 days at Cauldron, Lieutenant Harris spoke about it. I won't go into all that, but he just tells how bad it was. And that's when my great-great-great-grandfather, Hosea Morgan, and 2 of his sisters passed away. So Lucinda's father's Hosea and sister Liddy, her name was Liddy, died in the cholera epidemic at Cauldron. Lucinda testifies that John Miller took charge of the family and brought us on and attended to the drawing of rations or supplies as furnished by the government for use of the family. The group walked from Cauldron Creek, 40 miles north of Little Rock, all the way to the cones of Salisaw, where there was a Cherokee agent waiting for them. When they arrived, they were simply acknowledged and nothing more. There was no shelter, no food. They had no idea what to do. They were told to go wherever they wanted, but they were to register at Fort Gibson as soon as possible. Some stayed near the agency and some went on to Fort Gibson. The record says that Lucinda arrived at Fort Gibson in 1834. That's where she married Charles Fleetwood, and she was 17 years old and he was 27 years old. And this is some of the family history of the Trail of Tears. Thanks for listening.